Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this week's Saddleback webinar. I am Liz Mangus, Literacy Specialist with Saddleback Educational. We are thrilled you are joining us. As usual, we are starting our broadcast a little bit early today to let you get comfortable with the GoToWebinar platform and find your control bar. Your control bar is this dark gray rectangle. It is on the right-hand side of your web browser window. This is where you are going to find your handouts. So if you need a certificate of attendance for today, or if you are looking for handouts, they are right there in the control bar. The other important thing to remember for this webinar is the question field. So the question field is how you're going to interact with us today. It's if you have a question, you can type it in there, but anytime we prompt you to respond to any sort of question or engage with us today, you can do that by going to the question area on the control bar. Another thing to keep in mind is we always love it when you interact with us and follow us on social media. So please do follow us on Twitter. You can find us at SDLback. While you're waiting, you can go ahead, if you feel so inclined, grab your phone or your other device and go to Twitter. Let everybody know that you are joining us today to learn about creativity. You can use hashtag #SaddlebackWebinar for that. We still have some people joining us. We'll get started right at 3 o'clock Eastern time on the dot. In the meantime, let me go back to this screen here so you can see that while you're waiting. While we are waiting for our official start time, let's bring Evan in and say hello to Evan. How are you, sir?
I am great. I'm great. Just making sure that you guys can see me.
Let's see. Well, yes, you are there. I can see you. All right, there. Now, let me put this back on. Good.
Thanks for having me again.
How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. The heat is still going, and I know that I'm in California and I'm complaining about the heat. Well, not really complaining, but hopefully we get some respite from it tomorrow. But aside from that and the kind of the dry wind, I'm great.
So you're joining us from California. I'm in Texas. Most people who join us week after week already know that I'm in Central Texas. Those of you who are signing on, if you can go to the question area and type in where you are joining us from, that way we get to know a little bit about who's with us and where you are. So you're finished up with the school year, right?
Yes, well, that ended, I want to say, almost 2 weeks ago. We got out on the 28th.
Same here. We've been out for a couple of weeks now. So hopefully you're having a good summer so far and making good use of your time.
Yes. Trying to be productive, trying to be creative, trying to do all those things, as well as get some things that, as I'm sure people that are logged into this probably know, you don't really have time to get to during the school year. I'm trying to kind of get to them now, mainly things in the backyard.
Gotcha. Yeah, I hear you on that one. All right, we've got California in the house. We've got South Carolina. Oh, Cornelia, Miss Okraski. Hi, good to see you. Emily is in the house. Hi, Emily. She's joining us from North Carolina. We have Linneus, Maine. I've never heard of that, but learn something new every day. I'll have to check it out. We got Boston, Minnesota, Fresno, Iowa. A good showing so far. Thanks everybody for joining us. We got 2 more minutes before we will officially introduce Evan and get going with our conversation for the day. So are you working on any new books for Saddleback right now, Evan?
I just turned in a book, which I think is the 13th book in the Vintage Rose Mystery series, and I'm actually kind of coming up now with more pitches that I'm going to be sending over. And on top of that, I'm obviously always thinking of ideas. I literally have and I have to truncate it down. I have a pages and pages filled document with just random ideas that whenever I have like a little bit of a break, I will start filling it up. And I try not to send the whole thing just because I know that for the people that I send it to over there, it can get kind of overwhelming.
We have Alaska joining us too, and another person from Iowa, where it's chilly in Iowa today, apparently. That is good because down here in Texas and in California, it is unseasonably hot. So enjoy that chilliness while it lasts. Long Island, thank you for joining us. Nova Scotia, hello Canada, welcome. And we have, oh, Virginia, great. So it looks like we're having right now about 100 people, more and more are jumping on as we continue. So thank you everybody for being here and joining us. We just so look forward to these webinars and are so thrilled that you are continuing to hang out with us, even though many of you are on summer vacation. So, okay, let's just do one more reminder. Your handouts can be found in the control bar. There's a little icon there. It looks like a piece of paper. That's where you're going to find the handouts and the certificate of attendance for today. And also, you want to make sure you locate that question mark. That's the question area. That's where you are going to type anything that you want us to know. That's definitely how you're going to engage with us today. When we ask you questions, ask you to share your thoughts, you want to put them in the question area. We also want you to follow us on social media and let everybody know you're here to hang out with me and Evan and learn about creativity. So with that, it is 2 o'clock Central Time, 3 o'clock Eastern. That means it is time to jump right in. This is the first of our summer webinar series. So we've decided we wanted to do something a little bit different to launch the summer webinar series. We wanted to keep it light, and we wanted to address some things that we know might be on people's minds. So we wanted to talk about creativity. And the reason we chose this is because we know as educators, you need to be endlessly creative and be able to adjust and pivot in the moments to address student needs. And we went through an unprecedented, amazing change with what happened in the spring with COVID-19. So the past 10 weeks have been nothing but problem solving and creativity in the moment, trying to address student needs. So now many of you are on summer break or will be very soon, and you're probably feeling pretty tapped out when it comes to your creativity. You need to relax, recharge, but you also are thinking about the fall and how are we going to get the fall planned out and get creative and creatively problem solve around the fall when there are so many unknowns. And so we thought, who's the most creative person we know who can help us channel our creativity? And that's why we brought Evan in to talk to us today. Before we officially turn it over to Evan and let him tell you a little bit about himself, we want to launch a poll because we want to know what your priorities are for this summer. This is going to help us tailor our conversation a little bit. So my friend Amber in the background is going to launch a poll, and we want to know, what are your priorities this summer? Are you just going to unplug and relax? Are you in full throttle planning mode? Are you working on a personal project? Maybe you're writing a book like Evan, or is it all of the above? If you don't see an answer choice that pertains to you, go ahead to the question area and type it in. We might have somebody who's like, hey, I'm a 12-month employee. I wish I got to do this, but I don't. So if you see something or see your priority not listed, go ahead and type it in to the question area so you can participate along with everybody else. Let me pull up that question area here. So for those of you who are typing in, I can see what you're typing. So we'll do a few more seconds on the poll. All right, poll is closed. And it looks like we have, all of the above is the most popular answer, which is kind of what I thought. And Karen, shout out to you. You're teaching all summer. So we have some special tips for you to try to work in some relaxation and recharging while you're taking care of that too. Thank you for your participation. This is going to help us tailor our conversation a little bit today. Evan, 69% say all of the above. They're working on a personal project, they're relaxing, they're planning for the fall. So everybody's doing everything. Evan is the perfect person to talk to us about this because he not only is the most creative person we know, but he has his one foot in the creative world and one foot in the world of schools. So Evan, I'm not going to read a biography or anything like that. It's summer. We're taking a lighter approach. What would you like our audience to know about you before we jump into your tips for the day?
My name is Evan Jacobs. I'm a writer, screenwriter, independent filmmaker. I'm about to start in the fall my 13th year working as a behavior interventionist at the Tustin Unified School District. All of my years that I've been with them, I've worked in their autism department and I love it. More than anything though, what I have found is that my creative pursuits have translated very nicely to being, at least I think, being effective in the classroom. Whether it's engaging with students or bringing across content to a student, or maybe getting someone that doesn't like to read to maybe read a little bit more, or even in those moments where things can maybe get a little bit tense and potentially violent, I found that it's been those creative solutions, my ability to really strive to think outside of the box. That has very much been a light at a temporary, at the end of a temporarily dark tunnel.
So we have a few stragglers. Some people are just signing on. So for those of you who are just joining us, just to restate and recap. So Evan, you are not only an author, you've written over 80 books for Saddleback. You're a screenwriter, you're an independent filmmaker, but you also are a behavior interventionist, working with students with autism. You've worked with all age ranges. So you can see this is why we asked him to talk to us about this topic of creativity, because he's not just an author, but he works in schools every day. So he can help us make those connections between the creative process and the work that we need to do as teachers and as educators. So what we asked Evan to do for today's webinar is just to compile some good tips and some good advice for us to kind of recharge and channel the creativity, all the creativity that we're going to need to get back to school in the fall. So the tips that he has chosen from his personal experience, both working with students and obviously from his creative work, writing books and films and such, all of these tips are multi-purpose. They apply if you are just looking for how to get your mind in the right space for planning for the fall. They apply if you are working on your own personal creative pursuit this summer. And they're also just good guideposts for operating within a system where there are a lot of unknowns. And they are, of course, great lessons and bits of advice you can integrate into your practice to share with students as well. So let's get in and jump into the first tip. I love this. It's very timely, Evan. Your first big takeaway, big tip when it comes to channeling creativity is give yourself downtime. Now I got to ask, before you start elaborating on this downtime bit, did you do distance learning with your students?
Oh yeah, I did it. I want to say for 10 weeks. It kind of dovetailed. We went on spring break, and a few days before that, we got kind of an email that just said you may be going on an extended spring break. And at that time, I thought, oh, it'll be a week or two, and then it became what it became. And so yeah, I did distance learning for the whole time.
Okay, so you are living this. So you understand this notion of downtime both from the education perspective and also from the perspective of being an author. So tell us why this one is first on the list and what the downtime means to your ability to channel creativity and to ultimately be productive.
Well, what I find about when I have downtime is that shifting focus away from work for a while, it often results in new ideas and energy. At the same time, though, downtime is very, very difficult for me, and it sort of almost gives me anxiety. Like I'll wait for it to come, almost like something that I've earned, and then once I have that downtime, I begin to get nervous and I know that it's going to end eventually, so I get worried that I'm going to enjoy the downtime too much, and then I'm not going to be able to come out of it. At the same time, as much as I like downtime, as much as I love watching movies, as much as I love reading, as much as I love playing video games, I hate not feeling productive. And so what I often do is I'll start to structure my downtime. If I'm going to watch a movie, I'll make a list of movies to watch. So I feel like, okay, I'm tackling my Netflix queue. If I'm going to be reading books and magazines, I kind of make a list so that I can check things off. And what I find though is that as I'm doing that, I will start to get new ideas, and I don't want to lose those ideas, so I'll start writing those ideas down, and then I'll start kind of working during the downtime. But if I didn't give myself that downtime, or at least in my mind think that I was taking downtime, I don't know that I would see it as having a break from the work that I'm trying to take from so that I can recharge myself.
I think everybody knows we need downtime. Teachers more than anybody else know you understand that you need, rationally speaking, that you need downtime. But I also think teachers and educators are probably among a group of people that, like you, maybe have trouble with downtime because there's always more thinking and more planning and more you feel like you could be doing. So a lot of people who are on summer break right now and tuning into this webinar are probably like you. They structure their downtime because they're looking for inspiration and for ideas to get them in the right frame of mind to continue to plan. There are those of us, however, like me, who, in my mind, downtime is couch potato time, and that is what works for me. So I just want to give you a second to reiterate that, like, Evan, it helps you to structure your downtime, but that's not obviously the way for everybody, right?
Oh no, of course not. I mean, it's your time, so have it be totally unstructured. That's the point of this whole thing. And more than anything, take downtime however you can, whenever you can. For me, I like to be moving. I like to be creating things. So that sort of helps me have downtime while at the same time recharging. And I had to apply this to distance learning, especially because as a behavior interventionist, I was used to being with students for 6 to 7 hours a day. So, you're with these students and, you're used to that. And I'm sure a lot of people on this webinar are, probably felt this. But then all of a sudden, you go from that to, well, maybe you're only seeing a few students or however many students you saw. Maybe you're seeing them 10 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day, an hour a day, depending on how much you could fit into your day. So suddenly you're having to structure, or at least I had to structure this new downtime between students. But what that ultimately did was it led me to a lot of creative solutions to that challenge.
Yeah, I can definitely identify with that, but I am curious before we move on to the next tip. Thank you for that reminder, by the way. I always think it's helpful to hear that even though we know we should take downtime, we should allow ourselves that downtime, because in the end, it's going to help our creativity and our productivity to have had that little break. But I'm just curious, if for those of you who are listening, please go to the question area and let me know. Are you an Evan or are you a Liz when it comes to your downtime? Are you do you structure your downtime? Is that what helps you? Do you have a to-do list for your downtime to help you feel productive, or are you in total couch potato mode? Either way, it doesn't matter. I'm just curious because I feel like most people who are on this webinar are probably more of the structured downtime type. But just for fun, oh, Claudia's an Evan. I feel like we're going to have a lot of Evans. Okay, let's see who else. Oh no, we're 50-50 now. Okay, so okay, as these answers keep coming in, we'll keep moving it along. But I'm very curious to see what the breakdown is there. Okay, so the next tip or bit of advice is no creativity is ever wasted. What do you mean by what does this mean? What do you mean by that?
Well, creativity is a muscle. You have to exercise it. Whether you're writing a song, whether you're working on a lesson plan for next year, whether you're writing a book. No matter what happens with it, ultimately you're developing a strength that's going to come in handy at some point, even if in the moment you don't know where it's going or you don't know if you're even going to finish it. I can't tell you how many times I've brought in a book for a specific student that I just thought that they were going to love, or like I'll come up with a system where I'm working with a student for, working on math that I just think is going to totally work. And either A, they have no interest in what I'm trying to bring across, or it just doesn't work. However, maybe another student in the room liked the book that I brought in, and maybe there's another student in the room where the system that didn't work actually was useful later on, or maybe just some aspect of it was employed. Oftentimes when you create things, even if they don't initially work, they lead to other ideas that you ultimately never would have discovered if you hadn't gotten started and really kind of fan those initial flames of creativity.
I really like that perspective. I like the way you started by using the lens on your on the teaching and learning piece of what you do, because teachers spend so much time creating things and feeling like they're always reinventing the wheel. Um, and after a while, when things you spend all that time creating and things don't kind of go according to plan, I felt this in myself. After a while, I became kind of averse to creating things like, oh, what I do, it doesn't work or it doesn't. But that's not always the case. That's why I like this tip, and I like the way you explained it, because especially with everything we've been through over the past 10 weeks, you probably tried and created a million things that, and a lot of them probably didn't work because we're operating in this brand new environment. But taking the perspective of not, hey, I tried this and it didn't work, I'm going to throw it in the trash, but I tried this and it didn't work in this situation. Let me put it to the side in my toolbox for later, because it might come in handy later. Or maybe whatever it is I created, maybe I can disassemble it into its components and then keep the components over here and use it to build something new, not just to completely throw it away. I think that's a very positive way to look at the work that we do as educators, especially the more tired we get. And for me anyway, speaking for myself, the more tired I get, the more negative I can start to get. And so this is a nice way to refocus on being productive and being positive with the work that we do, with so many questions and so many unknowns. I want to hear how this applies to your writing career, but first let's check in with our responses. I have a lot of people who are a combination of Evan and Liz. They like to do a couch potato thing for a while and then get going. Rose, Rose has to have a to-do list. I get that too. And yeah, a lot of people who are in between, but I feel like there are a lot of people who are Evans. They definitely have to have a roadmap to feel like they are using their downtime wisely. So thank you for your responses, and we'll be prompting you for some more responses as we go along to kind of share your thoughts on these tips. So Evan, back to no creativity is ever wasted. Talk to us about how that applies with your writing or the other work that you do.
Well, I'm always thinking of ideas. I'm always writing things down. I'm always searching for ideas. I'll come home from work and I'll put my hands in my pockets and drop little pieces of paper with ideas on the table. And I'm getting rejected on a lot of these ideas. If not every day, at least every week. And what'll either happen is I'll either keep pursuing the idea because I believe in it, or it gets changed along the way, or that rejection is a blessing and I walk away from the idea. And at the same time, though, like we say, no creativity is ever wasted. I know that idea isn't gone and I can always go back to it. And I think that this has really actually helped me in the classroom, especially working with the population of students that I have worked with, because oftentimes, when you're in a rough moment with a student, and if you've been doing this for a while, you kind of, you don't always have those rough moments. So when they happen, it's hard to kind of realize that you're in that moment. And oftentimes I see myself, I see other people will sort of keep going in that moment, trying to get the student out of whatever tough time they're having, and it makes it worse. And what I find is if I just kind of step back, switch out with another coworker, suddenly they have a different person. Well, I mean, the student has a different person that they're working with. I have a different student that I'm working with. I'm not expending the emotional energy that I'm going to need throughout the entire day. The student isn't expending their energy. And I think the energy in the room, if once things de-escalate, everybody's happy because, that tense moment's gone.
It's just so interesting to me to hear how these lessons from your writing and filmmaking apply to your work with students. It's very inspiring, and it provides a good way to a fresh lens to look at work with students. So thank you for that. And it's a very positive outlook, which is I think what we all need at the beginning of summer when we're trying to relax and recharge. So let's move on to the tip number 3. Now this is more of a concrete tip that you can take away and apply immediately, as opposed to the first 2 things we talked about, which were really like gentle reminders that you need to take a break, and the work that you've done has value, and even if things haven't worked out in the way that you've wanted to over the past 10 weeks, that the work that you've done shouldn't be thrown away. But so this 15 to 30 minute rule, this is more of something I can start doing tomorrow. What is it, and why is it important?
I'll have people come up to me a lot of times, or and then just ask me like, hey, I wanna write a book, and I'll say write it, and they'll just stare at me, and I'll be like, seriously, write it. Start with 15 minutes a day. Sit down and do something, or it can be 30 minutes, but I just find that for a lot of people, 30 minutes is daunting, so just start with 15. And it doesn't have to be writing. It can be tackling a lesson plan that you want to get to for next year, or whatever. It's a manageable amount of time that I think you can ask someone, hey, just take 15 minutes out of your day, because projects are daunting, and I honestly believe that they need to be broken down. That's how it works for me. And I also find that if you work in that 15 to 30 minute a day time frame, you're not going to beat yourself up too much about it. If you start to kind of doubt yourself, you can just kind of tell yourself, I'll rework it later, or maybe the 15 minutes is up, and so you're going to come back to it the next day anyway, or maybe you'll just move on from that and use those 15 to 30 minutes to make something else. That's totally fine. There's no right or wrong way. It's just the point of doing it for at least 15 minutes a day. I write generally for about 2 to 3 hours a day, but that's spread out in about 30-minute increments over a multitude of projects. So I'm touching all these different things throughout the day. That makes me feel great. That recharges me, that energizes me, and it really helps me and allows me to be super productive across just a list of projects.
It's such a simple piece of advice for being so powerful, and that this is something that allows you to be as productive as you are with your writing. And if I could for a minute take this idea and apply it to a teacher on summer vacation who is thinking that they want to dig in and start planning for next year, but maybe doesn't know where to begin because nobody really knows anything about next year at this point in time. I personally, because I'm a couch potato, remember, might not start with 15 minutes a day. I might start with 5 minutes a day where I'm going to start thinking about my classroom and my students for next year. And I'm going to start jotting down ideas. What worked that I would want to carry forward based on the experience I had over the past 10 weeks? What are some things that are on my wish list? What are some standards or some lessons that I've been meaning to rework? And I might just generate a list of those ideas. Another thing that I might do is spend 5-10 minutes a day cleaning off the files on my computer, organizing my materials for next year, getting all my little manipulatives or books in order. Just a few minutes a day, thinking about the school year and what I can do, and just jotting down some ideas. And the purpose of that is, as more information starts to trickle out about what school is going to be for us next year, there aren't going to be so many cobwebs on my brain. I will have already been thinking about it a little bit every day and started maybe coming up with a picture in my mind that then I can more quickly adjust and cultivate to better match what my district is going to do. So that's what I thought of when you were talking about the 15 to 30 minute rule and how it could apply to what I'm trying to do this summer. And of course, if I'm working on a creative pursuit like writing a book, then it certainly applies. I can write for 15 minutes a day. So this is a very practical tool, widely applicable to all aspects of life. But when you think about it in terms of teaching and getting ready for the fall, it's something that feels very doable. This leads us to the next tip, and you sort of mentioned this a little bit, which is to break down your project. All of these little pieces of advice that we're giving are going to start to thread together, you'll notice. So Evan, talk to us about breaking down your projects, how you do it, and why it's important.
Well, honestly, without breaking down a project, I don't think I could get anything done or be able to multitask across a spectrum of projects. And I take a very mathematical approach. Let's say that I have to write a 25,000 word book, and it has to be done by a certain date. Just the thought of that, just like how a lot of people you mentioned are thinking about the upcoming school year, just the mere thought of that can be daunting. And especially now, because like you said, we don't know what that's really going to look like. We have an idea. So what I will do is I'll just start breaking it down. I'll say, okay, I'm going to give myself 7 days to write that outline. I don't know where I came up with the number 7. I just found that I could do 3, well, I could write a draft and I could do 3 rewrites of it during 7 days. So once I did that once, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to keep doing that. And then depending on how many words it is, in this case, it's 25,000, I broke it down by writing 500 words a day. I'm almost always going to write more than that, sometimes even double that. And psychologically, maybe I need to do that, because what I often find is once I start, and I'm not just dealing with, I have to write 500 words a day. Suddenly I come in and I only have to write 200 words a day, but then I end up writing more than that. So it's all, for me, this is all psychological. And then once I get that draft done, I often give myself about 2 or 3 weeks to rewrite it, just because, this is so I know I'm going to get it done within the deadline. And I find you can do this with any project. If you're painting, if you're writing a song, if you're doing a lesson plan, break it down. And I know, like we've been saying, we don't know what next year is going to look like, but most of the people, I'm assuming, on this webinar did distance learning in some capacity in these past 10 weeks. And I just think that you have an idea, now you take kind of that prior knowledge and use it to sort of formulate a plan and break it down for the upcoming year.
That's exactly what I was just going to ask you. As you were talking, I was thinking about the idea of breaking down a project. This is not a foreign concept to most teachers. This is what they do all day long, every day. You have a set of learning goals for your students and objectives, and you kind of backwards plan and break it into smaller tasks, and you have measurable benchmarks along the way. So I feel like teachers are naturally, they approach things in this way. It's part of the art and science of teaching. The trick with applying this to fall planning, though, Evan, is in order to really feel like you can do this, you need to know the end goals and you need to know the parameters. And a lot of us, we just don't know the parameters right now. So it's like, how do we break it down, and how do we start planning when we don't know the parameters? And you touched on this a little bit, which is to think about what we've done over the past 10 weeks. So did you want to speak to that a little bit more?
Well, one of the best ways to stay on top of things and to get something done is, to have, like you said, some system for completing it. Especially in the realm of distance learning, we don't know what next year is going to look like. I think one thing everyone on this webinar can agree about is it's going to look way different than a fall has looked in maybe any time that we've been in the educational system. However, without having that information about how things are going to look next year, I think it is beneficial to at least try to create a plan or create a system based on what we kind of experienced before. And I think that educators, endlessly inventive people, we are going to be able to kind of make a pretty good guess, even if it's off the mark. This is not an exact science. I don't have to tell the people on here that teaching is not an exact science, but I think that by taking that prior knowledge, they'll be able to craft something that comes pretty darn close. And like we've said, and this whole thing sort of threads back together, no creativity is ever wasted. I honestly don't think that when you're ready to think about it, I'm not saying to do it now, but when you're ready to start kind of confronting, okay, what is next year going to look like? I think you'll find that you're going to be pretty right on, and you'll be happy that you tried to at least formulate a plan for the fall.
You'll be at least part of the way there. That's for sure. And then maybe a little bit off the mark, but at least you'll have something in place where you can then adjust a little bit. And that's the idea, is trying to get some thoughts and some ideas down on paper based on our recent experiences to try to propel us forward. But to do all of this, it's pretty daunting and we're all pretty tired. So we're going to need some inspiration. You say inspiration is everywhere. Tell us what you mean by that, and then I have a question to ask our viewers. So, what do you say about inspiration?
Well, we need fuel for the work that we do, and inspiration's fuel. And the more places that we can find it, the more places that we can draw it from. The further that we're going to get when working on these lesson plans, when working on these books, when working on whatever. And I as a behavior interventionist in the classroom, I have so much respect for teachers because they're in a constant conundrum. They're constantly asked to be endlessly inspired, while at the same time they have a million different things pulling at that inspiration, and whether it's the students, whether it's the administration, parents, me as an aide in that room, kind of wanting direction. And it can really, I'm assuming, be very, very taxing. But more than anything, as tough as it seems, and with all the demands, factor in now the high level of uncertainty about what next year is going to look like. I think we need to be even more open to the fact that inspiration can really come from anywhere. And however we come back in the fall, it's going to take that thoughtfulness and that ingenuity that teachers naturally bring to their job. And part of that is going to be bringing the instruction, and then the other part is going to be providing a level of stability, and maybe just knowing that right there, perhaps that's the inspiration.
Yeah, I agree with you there that I think for all teachers, the inspiration comes from wanting to do right by the students, of course. But I will say it's a little early in the summer. It's a little early in the summer, Evan, to talk about meeting the unknowns and the challenges of next year as being an inspiration in and of themselves. I think you're right, but I think a lot of people are really tired right now. And if you are not ready, if you're listening to this and you are not ready to think about all the unknowns as being inspiration in and of themselves, you're back there at tip number one, and you got to be in downtime mode until you're ready to think about the challenge of a new and very different school year being a source of inspiration on its own. So I get what you're saying. I agree with you. But for me personally, I'm speaking for myself. I'm going to need a couple more weeks on the couch before I'm ready for that. So if you feel the same, that's okay. I think Evan is totally right, though. Ultimately, it's about learning and doing all we can to be confident and create a stable learning environment for the students. That is the inspiration, and meeting that challenge is the inspiration for most teachers. I'm getting ready to ask Evan about his inspiration for his writing, but before I do that, why don't you all go to the question area, and if you could, because I think this is very helpful, type in what, if anything, inspired you to kind of keep going throughout the craziness of the past 10 weeks in the spring, and what inspires you looking forward. For me, continuing to do these webinars and provide everybody with some food for thought every week is what keeps me inspired and keeps me going. So go ahead to the question area, type a couple of words of what is keeping you inspired and keeping you going, and we'll check back in with the responses in a few minutes. In the meantime, Evan, talk to us specifically about how you get inspired for your writing. I mean, you've written over 80 books for us. Where does all that come from?
I'm always reading books. I'm always watching movies, and I can't tell you how many times just with one of the magazines, whatever magazine I happen to just be kind of thumbing through, maybe I'll come across an article on Fortnite, and that'll maybe spark an idea for a book, and at the same time it'll allow me to connect with a student who I know likes Fortnite. And I'm always looking for ideas. And I try to listen to the way that people talk. I've come up with whole books literally based on one line of a conversation. The book that I wrote for you guys, The Underdogs, I read like a tiny story about a girls football team in Arizona. Boom, I saw the whole story in my head. I typed up an email and pitched it. Skinhead Birdie. I was working in a PE class with a student who was known for being very, very violent. And it was just one of those situations where your antenna is really, really up. So while he and I were walking around the track, I saw this girl. She wasn't exercising and she just sat there, or no, I'm sorry, she stood there and her arms were folded. She looked really, really mad. And I remember thinking, okay, that person, probably not older than 15 or 16, why are they so angry? And not that they shouldn't be angry or that they couldn't be angry, but why? And then suddenly just this whole story about this person started, percolating in my head. So, I mean, I ultimately ended up writing the book, but I'm always just looking for it. And it just, sometimes it finds me, sometimes I find it. But I think that, I'm interested in people, and I'm curious.
That's it. You're curious and you're always looking and observing, and it sounds like it definitely helps get you those ideas. Let's check in with our audience response here. Loving learning and taking classes. The students are my inspiration. Catherine Peterson says she wants to be there for her students. A lot of people are saying my students. Maintaining relationships, learning new techniques, coffee, amen to that. So I gotta open this one up. What keeps me inspired is my students, okay? What keeps me inspired, Claudia says, I want to get this right. And the more I observe and learn, the more clarity I get regarding how to handle remote learning. So watching and listening to what is going on around you sparks inspiration. Absolutely, that's just what Evan was sharing. So a lot of people, I think, share that common thread and ideal of being curious and wanting to learn and just wanting to constantly learn. Karen says her students inspire her. They are working in the COVID-laden meat processing plant in northern Colorado. I want to do well by them as they're trying to learn English and bettering their lives. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, going back to what you said, Evan, meeting the challenge of the unknown, in a sense, has to be a source of inspiration in and of itself. There was one more thing. So Laura says she's looking for inspiration and creative ideas. So Laura, definitely continue to jump in on these webinars. We got a lot of different guests who are coming on to present ideas, and also Facebook groups are a great way to just talk to colleagues and learn about what other people are doing and the things that they're exploring going forward, trying to look for those ideas. So please just say survival though. Yes, survival. Yeah, we have to think about that too. And again, going back to that downtime, taking it when we can get it is certainly going to help us get through and maintain the strength that we need to come up with some creative solutions. Okay, let's go on to the next one, which is explore what scares you. Evan, I think we've all been pushed out of our comfort zones a little bit lately, and we're all feeling a little bit tired. So now you're telling me that this is a good thing. Is that what you're trying to tell me, Evan?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was the filmmaker. I think it was the filmmaker John Cassavetes who said, "Why should I be afraid of what I don't understand?" And I just find that if you can approach the things that scare you and use them as a tool for creating something new, you'll simultaneously confront the fear and exercise your creative muscles at the same time. I feel that I've been confronting my fears, ever since I started writing and making movies and stuff like that. And it's that creativity that's kind of forced me to push myself. It's how I learned how to make animated movies, like feature-length animated movies. I have no training as an animator. Never went to school for it, but I wanted to learn how to do it. I bought a program and I worked with it for a year and figured it out. And I'm not saying that I'm Pixar yet, but I keep making movies, and one of those movies was a horror film called Insect that I primarily made because I was super afraid of bugs. And I'm not saying that now I want to see bugs crawling all over my room and in my clothes, but when I see bugs now, when I see spiders, when I see whatever, I kind of know about it now, and I just sort of know that, hey, they're doing what they're doing because that's how they live, and that is basically what that tip means. Get sort of comfortable being uncomfortable. But I also don't think you can do that all the time, nor should you, because like we're talking about being inspired, if you're constantly uncomfortable all the time, it's just too much.
So because you've been doing this with your creative process and it's just in your nature to gravitate towards the things that kind of scare you a little bit, I'm interested to hear how that helped you when you moved to distance learning. I think everybody wants to hear that because it is not fair and it is not cool that we had to move to this model because it ultimately, we feel, until we get it right, it shortchanges students. And so I kind of just curious to hear how your natural tendency to gravitate toward the things that that scare you, how did that translate into your practice with kids?
Well, I'm not gonna lie. At first, the thought of suddenly my classroom that I'd been driving to was now an office in my home every day. That was scary. But then I kind of thought about it, and I just started thinking, and I said I'm going to try to use my creativity to really confront this fear about distance learning, because many of us didn't have a choice. This is what we do, and we're obviously not going to go out during a pandemic and get another job, nor did I want to. So suddenly I had to use that creativity to find stuff for students' IEP goals, or I was creating videos related to IEP goals, or that I just thought might be comforting to the students and their families. Now going into the fall, the idea of distance learning doesn't seem as daunting, but there's another fear, and I'm sure there's people out there that may or may not share this. We've been out of the classroom a long time, and it's been years for me, and I'm sure a lot of people on this webinar, since I've been out of a classroom this long, and what's returning going to not only look like, but what's that going to feel like? Even going back to a classroom one or 2 days a week. And remember, I work with all different kinds of students, ED, students that would be classified as intellectually disabled, and students with autism. But the thing about that is, in this group of people, stability is key. How are they going to handle all the changes and bumps in their schedule, where one day they may be at school, one day they're learning from home? It might be half a day at school and half a day at home. And it's these very real fears that we're all facing that already has me kind of trying to think up strategies about what's going to make me as effective as I can possibly be once August comes. And at the same time, since I know that I'm scared, I'm really trying to embrace that fear, so that when I work with my students, when I work with their families, when I work in the classroom, hopefully that fear doesn't show, and maybe by embracing it, it'll really show that it's just confidence, and I've embraced it, and here we are.
So spending the time thinking about it, and I admire that about you, because I know for me, my perspective would be, I don't want to think about it because it just feels very unfair, and I'm worried, and I'm a little bit angry that we're here right now. And maybe a lot of you out there, and chime in if you agree with me. But if you're anything like me, the more tired I get, the more angry and resentful I would feel that somehow this is falling to me to kind of figure this all out. And the perspective that you're bringing here is, well, if you look at it as, hey, this is exploring what scares you, and this is exploring something that is kind of an obstacle, and eventually, if you apply the right lens to it, it's going to generate some ideas and some solutions. Even if it just gets your brain going to start thinking about, maybe I'll try this, maybe I'll try that, you're going to be further ahead in the game than you would be if you just ignored it until day one of school in the fall. So I think that's a really interesting way to look at this situation. Let's go on to the, let's see, it's 2:44. So we have a few more minutes before we always like to keep our webinars not too long, is of course now because it's the summer too, so we don't want to keep anybody for too long. So the next piece is simply doing something is important. And actually, Evan, this ties in nicely to what I was just saying about exploring what scares you, because it's easy for people to just hone in on the fact that they're tired, they're frustrated, they feel the weight of the world on their shoulders for wanting to get things right for their kids. And all of that can be enough to paralyze you and make you go, whatever, I don't know, I'm just going to wait to be told what to do. So this piece of advice, simply doing something is important, I think it's really cool that you followed this one up to the, you put it right next to explore what scares you. So I'm sorry, I keep talking. It's your turn to talk, Evan. Tell us about this particular tip.
Well, one thing that I think stops people from doing any kind of creative pursuit is that fear of being bad. And it's a fear that we all have. I have it constantly, and it's always with me, no matter what. And, very rarely do I think that something that I'm doing is going to be deemed this amazing thing. And sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. It's more often than not that it isn't, or it's just, hey, some people like it and some people don't. But I think that we ultimately, especially now, especially with this distance learning thing, and if you're starting to think about it now, or even when you start thinking about it, because it's like what Liz is saying, if you're still, and if you want to be in downtime mode for as long as you need to be in downtime mode, do it, because that's what the summer's for. It's for you to recharge. But I think that when you start, be careful to not be too critical about what you're thinking and about what you're doing, and just know that simply doing something is really the thing. And that will, I think, give you confidence, and if you do 15, 30 minutes a day, eventually you'll see, hey, I've got some stuff here. And that's going to be kind of your tools to sort of help you navigate whatever it is we start up with this fall.
That's perfect. I was just going to tie it back to the 15 to 30-minute rule, because these two tips are very closely related. Just a little bit of something, thinking, writing, jotting things down. It's going to get you a lot further than it sounds on paper. So I think that is a really good piece of advice. We're going to go on to allow yourself to be imperfect. And again, this follows the 15 to 30-minute rule. Simply doing something is important. Allowing yourself to be imperfect. We are in a situation right now where we are all in the midst of creating something new. So we've got to let go of perfection. Wouldn't you agree with that, Evan?
Oh yeah. I think it was the filmmaker Jean Renoir who said, perfection is in the mind. And I write and I make movies and do all that stuff, knowing that I'm going to rewrite or reshoot or re-edit. Perfection really isn't an immediate goal or even something that's ever really on my mind. We're going to have many imperfect days, and especially with so many of the unknowns that face educators now. And I think the trick is to recognize that, like I kind of talked about earlier, kind of get comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think this applies to any creative pursuit, any kind of planning that you're going to do for next year, anything. And going into the fall, I think the trick is really going to be remembering that, and also accepting that school in August is not going to look like what we're used to it looking like. It may not look like that for a while, but once again, I talked about exploring what scares you and kind of embracing that. If you're able to embrace the imperfections of a situation, a lot of times you can use them to your advantage.
I really want to ask you to elaborate on that, but for the sake of time, I'm going to thread that into the next in the next piece, which is viewing everything you just said as an opportunity and seizing opportunities no matter how they may come. Can you talk about the fall as a means of seizing an opportunity, And then I also want to hear how you do this in your creative pursuits as well, with writing.
Well, once again, I'm going to paraphrase a filmmaker, Melvin Van Peebles, and he said a setback was simply an opportunity in work clothes. And there were many times during distance learning that I felt alone. I'm sure a lot of people felt that way. I felt like I was blowing in the wind as I'm, creating all these things for the students. I was wondering, is this going to matter? And then after, working with the students, I really started to understand, and this was touched on in another Saddleback webinar, how simply being there for the students and their families, that was the most important thing. But at the same time, it wasn't enough just to be there. I really kind of had to see this as an opportunity. It was going to be an opportunity to connect with students that I was working with in a different way. It'd be an opportunity to learn about their families and see inside their home, something that for me also on the side would be invaluable in the stories that I write. It would be another opportunity for me to take the creative skills that I've been working with and, use those to create content for the class. And it's not easy to look for opportunities. We're busy every day. Teachers, once again, constantly push for time in every capacity. And, we want our lives and our jobs, at least I do. I want things to be simple and I want them to maintain a certain flow. Distance learning upended all of that. And suddenly our jobs were now part of our life in a way that was completely different from before. Yet within this, it was an opportunity, and it still is, it's an opportunity to figure things out. And, how can we still be effective in a remote capacity? And it takes a lot of work. That's why downtime this summer is so important. And, for me, it's a chance to kind of recharge creatively, take what I've learned. I mean, I'm already thinking, and I've already kind of pitched some stories to you guys about the situation. And, I'm just going to keep going because as this situation continues to evolve, hopefully my pitches will become more relevant and more fluid. And, I may not be working with students every day, but it's these kind of creative projects that I'm thinking about, that I'm working on, that are, that's going to ultimately keep me sharp and keep thinking about ways, different ways to bring instruction to them, whether we're in a hybrid model, whether we're in an all distance model, or whether, eventually, because we're going to be all back in the classroom.
Eventually, we will all be back in the classroom. Hopefully that is sooner than later. I want to shout out Maria Vincent. She just posted this comment in the question area. She said, are we really asking students to be perfect? No, just be the best you can be, teachers included. She was speaking to the previous point about allowing yourself to be imperfect. I want to say thank you, Maria, for chiming in with that. I wholeheartedly agree with that. One of the biggest struggles with having to go remote in the spring is not only having to figure it all out again, but as I mentioned before, teachers hold themselves to a very high standard because we take our jobs of educating students very seriously. And so it's really, really hard to make mistakes because you realize that if you, or you feel at least that if you're making a lot of mistakes, then your students are not reaping the benefits of what you do. And I think we need to change the perspective on that. We're all learning in this together. And in a sense, it's a really authentic opportunity and a real world opportunity to address a problem in real time alongside with your students and come up with some solutions as best as you possibly can. I want to thank you so much, Evan. We're going to move on to questions, but if you have any specific questions for Evan, go ahead and put them in the question area. I have a few that people typed in or sent in with their registration. So we're going to take those questions in just a moment. But as usual, I want to give you a heads up on who is coming next week for next week's Saddleback webinar. We're going to have Laura Gardner on. She's the founder of Immigrant Connections. And we sent out a survey recently asking what kind of webinar topics you would like to see. And by a mile, the preferred topic of choice was how to engage families, particularly families of English learners in a virtual world, moving forward with potential hybrid learning arrangements. So we've asked Laura to come on and share her thoughts and her resources on engaging EL families in a virtual world. So that will be next Thursday at 3 o'clock Eastern Time. You can register on our website, sdlback.com/webinar series, or we of course always send out emails to prompt you to register for those as well. So that's next week. We hope to see you there. In terms of questions, Evan, there were a couple of good ones that we received from participants. And I actually think we've probably answered these questions already through the conversation we've been having today. But the first one is, how do I plan for next year? I'm hearing all these kinds of different scenarios, like I'm going to have cohort A and cohort B, and they're going to come on different days of the week, and then some of it's going to be remote. And how am I supposed to plan for this? Do I need to just develop a skeleton? And based on what we talked about today, I'm assuming you're going to say yes, that developing a skeleton is the way to go. But I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the teachers will naturally develop skeletons, and I think, they're going to remember what happened these past 10 weeks, and they're going to take that knowledge and they're going to tweak it, just like teachers are really artists, they are constantly tweaking their work constantly. And so, and the beauty for them is they can continue working on it, year after year. And that to me is definitely how that's going to happen. Start with a skeleton, take the prior knowledge, kind of like what we were talking about, take some downtime first if you can, put in 15 to 30 minutes a day, and then as it gets closer, I'm sure you'll start to see it, at least that's the way it seems to me, you'll start to see it take shape into, okay, I'm going to be able to use this because now I know what the situation is, because we're eventually gonna know. So,
right.
Which is good.
Yes, and I think letting go of this idea of, hey, I'm not going to start this because I don't know anything. It's a waste of time for me to start thinking about this until I have all the information. Because I can tell you that's probably what I would have done. But that's because I want to be perfect at everything I do. But we can actually end up being more creative and more productive if we let go of this idea of being perfect and coming up with skeletons and applying what we've done before, just to get some sort of a roadmap and to get our thoughts going. The second question had to do with burnout and virtual instructor burnout in particular. This is a real thing, as we're all learning. Just because we are working from home doesn't mean that it's like sweatpants and slippers and relaxation all day long. How do we think about staying recharged and refreshed in having so much screen time? And I think this goes back to downtime, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, with what you just said there, going back to downtime, that can be a double-edged sword, because for a lot of people, a break from the screen, the screen of their work, they suddenly start going on Netflix, but then they're watching another screen. And honestly, I think to really work with burnout, I think limiting screen time as much as you can. And I know that's hard. That's hard for me because, I did distance learning, and then I would go downstairs and I'd work on my iPad, and then I would go and I would work back upstairs and work on my computer and work on a movie. I mean, that's screen. But I think downtime and breaks away from the computer and maybe reading or maybe just exploring things that are just have nothing to do with, creating lesson plans right now, because eventually you're going to. I mean, teachers just do that. You can just see it. It's this process, and they know it, and it really amazes me, just because I honestly, like the thought of, I've never had to create a lesson plan. The thought of having to create a lesson plan and bring it across to 30, 40 students is and then this doesn't even factor in, if you're dealing with students with special needs, or other students that are maybe learning the English language. It's a lot to take in. So I think, honestly, for me, the way that I deal with not burning out is finding interests that are completely unrelated to what I may be working on at the time.
I would actually go a step further and I would take that 15 to 30 minute rule and I would use that as an overlay to downtime as well. So if I'm in the midst of working on something and I need to find a way to get downtime from it, and that can be hard in and of itself when the school year is going to find downtime, just taking 5, 10, 15 minutes to turn your attention away to something that refreshes you might be a good way to work that in there as well. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Before we sign off, Evan, one of the big pieces of advice that is standing out to me is simply doing something is important. So before we sign off, if you could go to the question area and let me know. Oh, wait, we have some more questions. How do you shut off your brain from creating and planning? Somebody finds themselves planning in the middle of the night. I think, Evan, I don't know if you ever shut off really. I think you just
love
from
that.
one.
And start typing what you're like honestly, if you're wondering what I would do to turn that off, I would write that down immediately, because what I would be the most worried about is that I would lose that inspiration and that I would lose that creative plan or creative idea. And so honestly, if I'm doing that at night, I would write it down, and that'll generally let me forget about it, because that does happen. And I actually get kind of upset with myself when I don't write it down and when I don't save it.
That's really I never thought of that. It's so practical. Elaine, I don't know if you do this. Elaine, thank you for the question, by the way. But getting up and writing it down and knowing that it's out of your brain and in a safe place and you can come back to it during the waking hours, that might actually help if that's the situation you're in. It seems so obvious, but I didn't even think of that. Now I know when I'm up in the middle of the night thinking about things, just jot them down. That tells my brain, hey, these thoughts are in a safe place. I can come back to them when the sun is up. Very, very helpful and very practical. Oh, you're so well. Elaine says thank you, Evan.
Well,
So,
sometimes I'll just read this very, very quickly. I've been in movies and I'll get like I'll just be hit with a flood of inspiration, and I hate to be this person in the movie theater. I will literally have to take out my phone, I shield it with my jacket or my shirt, and I've got to type up the idea. But once it's in my phone, once it's out of my brain, that really does allow my brain to shut off.
perfect. And I just love practical, quickly usable advice, and that definitely falls into that category. So thank you so much for that. Oh, I was going to have everybody share something, but now we got more questions coming in. We'll take 2 more, and then we can sign off. Stephanie wants to know, how do you organize all of your ideas? You just write them down? Do you have random scraps of paper everywhere, or is there a system for that too?
Well, I wish I had it in front of me. I make a list every day before I go to bed, and it lists out the projects that I'm going to work on for the next day. And I mean, I wish I could turn this computer, but you would see that there's 5 whiteboards over here with various ideas at various stages. And I need it out of my brain. I need to kind of just, I feel that I get very, very cluttered that way. So, organizing ideas, I decide what I'm going to work on, and then I make that be what I work on for a specific day for a certain amount of time. Like I spoke about in the webinar, it's a mathematical approach, and I'm hitting it every day because I know that after a certain amount of time, it's going to be done. Then I get to move on to something else, and all that kind of inspires me and excites me. And so thank you very much for that. Thank you for all this, but thank you very much.
Such great questions. Nancy Fernandez says she keeps a pad and a flashlight by her bed. Elaine, for waking up in the middle of the night to get those ideas out, I would do exactly the same thing. So I would like for everybody, if you could, go to the question area and think about Evan's bit of advice. Simply doing something is important. If you have a takeaway, I know a lot of times we go to these PDs, and before we close out the PD, the presenter says, write down one thing you're going to take back to your classroom and do tomorrow. This is not quite that, but it's what, based on our conversation today, has motivated you to simply do something? Or tell me, what's the one thing you think you're going to try out? And we'll close out with that. And while you're putting those answers in, I just want to remind you where you can find Saddleback. We are, of course, on the web at sdlback.com, on Twitter. Hopefully you've been tweeting about this great information and this great conversation throughout our webinar today. But we're also on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest. We're everywhere. Find us, follow us. We'd love to have you to continue the conversation. And thank you so much for joining us. And Linnea says, I'm going to rest. That's what she's going to do. Amen to that. More rest and more downtime. And we are hoping to see you next week for Laura Gardner to talk about family engagement. Cornelia says, allow herself to be imperfect, and Rachel's going to try to be more organized and plan weekly. Simply doing something is important. And thank you, Evan. I can tell people are getting a lot of, no creativity is ever wasted. Yes. Yeah, I'm trying to end the webinar, guys, but I'm too into these responses. Going to take a couple of minutes. Okay. All right. We got to end because it's past time to end. But thank you so much for your participation, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We will see you next week. And thank you, Evan. Everybody have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.